A rancher purchased an Apache woman called Unruly, but she became the love he needed. The sun rose slowly over the wide open plains, casting a golden glow over the ranch. Dust swirled in the early morning breeze, and the quiet was broken only by the sound of horses grazing and the occasional caw of a distant crow. The rancher, a tall, rugged man with hands worn from years of hard work, walked along the fence lines, checking the livestock. He had lived alone on this ranch for many years. Life was simple, disciplined, and often lonely. The land provided everything he needed: cattle to tend, fields to care for, and the open sky for company. But it could never fill the emptiness he felt deep inside. The rancher's routine rarely changed. Each morning he rose before the sun, fed the animals, repaired fences, and worked the land. Evenings were quiet, filled with the faint crackle of the fireplace and the soft rustling of wind through the trees. He was respected by neighbors for his skill and independence, but he had few close companions. Most men had families, wives, or friends with whom they shared their days. The rancher had only himself, and the thought sometimes weighed heavily on him, though he rarely admitted it. One afternoon, a stranger arrived at the ranch, riding a weary horse and carrying news. He spoke of a market in the nearby town where unusual and rare things were being offered. Among them, he said, was a woman of Apache descent, known among traders as Unruly. She was described as spirited, strong-willed, and unlike any woman one could easily control. People whispered warnings about her temper, her independence, and her fierce nature. Many who met her found her challenging, they said, but some saw her as extraordinary, a person who could not be ignored. The rancher listened carefully. There was something about the description that caught his attention. Perhaps it was the word unruly itself, which suggested strength and fire. Perhaps it was the hint of independence, of someone who could not be tamed easily. He had spent his life managing the land, commanding cattle and facing storms. But human hearts were far more complicated than any herd or fence. And yet, a spark of curiosity flickered inside him. He thought about the possibility of going to the market. He thought about what it might mean to meet this woman and to bring her to his ranch. Was it wisdom or folly that drew him toward the idea? Perhaps both. He had lived a life shaped by routine and discipline, but the prospect of something unexpected, something alive and untamed, stirred a new feeling in him. The next day, the rancher set out on horseback, riding for hours along winding dirt roads and across open fields. He carried little more than a small bag with food, water, and some coins. But his mind was full of questions. Who was this woman called Unruly? Why had she been brought to the market? What had her life been like before now? He did not know, but he felt a strange pull, as if the land itself was guiding him toward this encounter. When he arrived at the town, the market was busy with traders, farmers, and townsfolk. The air was thick with dust, the smell of hay, and the sounds of haggling voices. Stalls overflowed with goods, clothing, tools, livestock, and rare items brought from distant places. In the center of the market, behind a low wooden fence, stood the woman known as Unruly. Her eyes were sharp and alert, scanning the crowd with a mixture of defiance and curiosity. Her hair was dark and thick, falling in waves over her shoulders, and her posture spoke of pride and strength. She did not lower her gaze or shrink away from the people who came close. The rancher approached carefully, observing her from a distance. He could see why she had been called unruly. She refused to be pushed or rushed. When a trader tried to speak to her in a commanding tone, she met his words with a calm, measured response, her voice carrying both firmness and intelligence. There was no fear in her expression, only a quiet, steady courage. Something inside the rancher stirred. He saw a person unlike any he had met before, someone whose spirit could not be contained. After a long moment of consideration, the rancher made his decision. He approached the trader who had brought her and spoke plainly. "I will take her," he said. The words left his lips with a weight of certainty, as though he had known for some time that this was the path he was meant to take. The trader raised an eyebrow, surprised by the calm resolve in the rancher's tone, but nodded, The agreement was made, and the woman now called Unruly would leave the market with him. The journey back to the ranch was quiet. Unruly sat on her own horse, her eyes scanning the endless plains. She said little, and the rancher respected her silence, sensing that words were not always necessary between them. The wind blew gently, carrying the scent of wildflowers and earth, and the rhythm of the horse's hooves on the dusty path filled the space between them. There was tension, certainly, but also a growing awareness of one another's presence. When they finally arrived at the ranch, Unruly paused at the edge of the property, taking in the vast fields, the sturdy fences, and the simple but strong homestead. She seemed unimpressed yet curious, and the rancher felt a strange sense of anticipation. How would she adjust to life here? How would he adjust to having her in his world? The answers were not clear, but for the first time in many years, the rancher felt a flicker of excitement, of possibility. The first days were not easy. Unruly was cautious, testing the boundaries of the ranch and the patience of the rancher. She moved through the land with purpose, observing the animals, the tools, and the routines. The rancher watched her carefully, noting the way she handled the horses, the way she seemed to understand the land, as if it were speaking to her. Despite her independence and strong will, there was a certain grace and intelligence in her movements that intrigued him further. He realized that life with her would not be simple or quiet. She would not simply follow orders or adapt immediately to his ways. But he also sensed that her presence brought something new: energy, challenge, and a reminder that life could be unpredictable and beautiful. He began to understand that this woman, known to the world as Unruly, was not a problem to be solved, but a person to be known. Someone whose strength might one day match his own in courage, resilience, and spirit. Evening came, and the ranch settled into its familiar rhythm. The sun dipped low, painting the sky with streaks of orange and pink. The rancher stood on the porch, looking out over the fields, and beside him, Unruly remained silent, watching the horizon. Neither spoke, but the quiet was comfortable, a shared understanding forming between them. In that moment, the rancher felt a shift deep within his heart, a recognition that his life, once solitary and predictable, had begun to change in ways he could not yet imagine. The first part of their story ended not with certainty, but with possibility. The rancher knew the challenges lay ahead: clashes, disagreements, and tests of patience, but he also sensed that this meeting was no accident. The woman called Unruly, fiery and untamed, had entered his life not to conform, but to challenge, to awaken, and perhaps to bring the love and companionship he had long thought impossible. The plains stretched endlessly before them, full of promise, and both of them stood on the edge of a journey that would forever alter the course of their lives. Life on the ranch settled into a rhythm, but it was far from peaceful. Unruly, as everyone had come to call her, refused to fit into the patterns the rancher expected. She woke early, not always at the same time as he did, and moved through the land with her own pace and methods. She tended the animals differently, handled the horses in ways that were unfamiliar to the rancher, and often questioned why certain chores had to be done at all. At first, the rancher found it frustrating. He had spent years creating order on his land, and here was someone who seemed determined to disrupt it. When he asked her to mend a fence in a certain way, she would insist that her method worked better. When he tried to teach her to feed the cattle at the usual time, she argued that animals were intelligent and could sense when they were truly hungry. These disagreements were not loud or harsh, but persistent and steady, like a wind gradually reshaping a landscape. The ranch hands, who had been accustomed to following the rancher's orders without question, watched the exchanges with wide eyes. They whispered among themselves, unsure whether to admire Unruly's courage or fear the friction she created. She did not speak in a harsh voice, but her confidence and refusal to yield made it clear that she could not be controlled by mere commands or expectations. Despite the tension, the rancher could not help but notice her intelligence and resourcefulness. She saw problems others overlooked: the way water pooled in a certain corner of the pasture, the signs of illness in a horse before it became serious, the subtle shifts in weather that suggested a coming storm. Slowly, he began to realize that her knowledge of the land and animals was extraordinary. Where he saw chaos, she saw patterns. Where he saw stubbornness, she saw understanding. One afternoon, a small conflict erupted that would test both of them. A new colt had wandered too close to the edge of the property, near a small, hidden ravine. The rancher rode quickly to retrieve it, only to find Unruly already there. She had calmed the frightened animal, with a steady voice and careful movements. The rancher, used to taking charge in such situations, initially felt his pride sting. But as he watched her work, he could not deny the skill and patience she displayed. "You handled that well," he admitted quietly, not wanting to seem too impressed. Unruly looked up, her eyes steady and unyielding. "I've seen animals like this before," she said simply. "They need trust more than force." Her words struck him. She was not trying to compete or challenge him, but to offer knowledge. Yet, accepting it required humility, something he was not used to showing. For the first time, he considered that perhaps the friction between them was not a battle to win, but a lesson to learn. Over the following weeks, small incidents continued to shape their relationship. Unruly's independence tested his patience daily. She refused to do chores in the exact order he expected. She explored the land in ways he considered reckless. She even spoke bluntly to the ranch hands when they treated her with suspicion or disrespect. And yet, each time she acted boldly, she also demonstrated a wisdom and skill that could not be ignored. The rancher began to observe her more carefully, noticing the subtle way she adapted to challenges. When a sudden thunderstorm rolled in one afternoon, threatening the cattle and flooding low areas, Unruly moved quickly. She guided the animals to higher ground, secured loose equipment, and helped the rancher reinforce the fences that might break. He had been prepared for a storm, yes, but her quick thinking prevented small problems from turning into disasters. That night after the rain had passed, they sat quietly by the fire. The rancher handed her a cup of hot coffee and she accepted it with a nod, her expression thoughtful. The events of the day had shifted something between them. Not a complete understanding, but a subtle awareness that each brought value the other could not provide alone. Despite these moments of respect, conflicts continued. Unruly's boldness often clashed with the traditions of the ranch. She questioned why certain rules existed, why some tasks were done out of habit rather than necessity. She challenged the men's assumptions, not in anger, but in search of better ways to live and work. The rancher sometimes grew frustrated, wondering if the simplicity he had relied upon all these years was slipping through his fingers. Yet deep down he also realized that change was inevitable. He could either resist it or embrace it. One particularly tense incident occurred when Unruly tried to plant a small garden near the barn. The rancher had long believed that crops required strict rows and careful planning, but she wanted to experiment, mixing herbs, vegetables, and flowers in ways that seemed disorderly to him. When he questioned her, she responded firmly but politely, explaining how the plants could benefit each other, how nature thrived in diversity rather than rigid structure. At first, he was unconvinced, but over time he watched as her small garden flourished. The herbs thrived, the vegetables grew strong, and even the flowers seemed brighter and more vibrant. Slowly, he began to see that her unconventional methods had merit. What had seemed like defiance was, in fact, creativity, intelligence, and a different kind of knowledge. Their clashes, while frequent, became less about winning and more about learning. The rancher began to appreciate that Unruly's fiery spirit was not something to tame but something to respect. She challenged him to see beyond the way he had always done things, to question his assumptions, and to consider possibilities he had never imagined. And Unruly, in turn, began to notice the rancher's quiet strength, his steady hand, and the depth of care he held for the land and animals. The ranch hands, too, began to adjust. At first wary of her independence, they gradually came to respect her skills and courage. They saw her face danger without fear, approach animals with calm authority, and solve problems that had previously required the combined efforts of several men. Though her presence disrupted their usual routines, they began to recognize that she brought strength and wisdom to the ranch that no one else could. As the weeks turned into months, a subtle bond began to form between the rancher and Unruly. It was not yet friendship, nor was it love. It was something quieter, a mutual awareness that each had value the other could not ignore. They learned to anticipate each other's reactions, to trust each other in small matters, and to communicate without words. The land, which had once been a stage for his solitary life, now became a shared space of discovery and growth. One evening, as the sun dipped behind distant hills, painting the sky with deep shades of orange and pink, the rancher and Unruly stood side by side, watching the cattle graze. The air was calm, the land silent except for the low murmur of the animals. The rancher spoke softly, almost to himself. "You are not what I expected." Unruly turned to him, her dark eyes steady. "And you are not what I expected," she replied. The words hung in the air, simple yet profound. Neither fully understood what the future would hold, but both recognized that their lives were changing. Where there had once been tension, there was now curiosity. Where there had been resistance, there was now acknowledgement. And though challenges still lay ahead, neither could deny that something powerful was forming. A connection built on respect, intelligence, and the spark of human spirit. As night fell, the rancher returned to his cabin, leaving Unruly tending to the animals under the moonlight. He could feel her presence in every sound, the soft steps, the low calls of the horses, the quiet determination she carried with her. It was a strange new feeling, both unsettling and exhilarating. He knew the days ahead would test him in ways he could not yet imagine, but he also felt a flicker of anticipation. Life on the ranch had always been solitary, predictable, and safe. Now it was unpredictable, challenging, and alive. The first storms of conflict had passed, but the deeper storms of understanding were only beginning. Unruly, fierce, and untamed had arrived at the ranch not to simply follow rules, but to teach, to challenge, and perhaps to awaken something the rancher had long forgotten. A life richer, fuller, and more connected than he had ever dared to imagine. The seasons began to change, bringing with them new challenges and opportunities on the ranch. Spring arrived first, painting the land with shades of green and the scent of fresh earth. Flowers peeked through the soil, and the cattle grew more active as the weather warmed. For the rancher, this time of year had always been about routine and hard work. But now, with Unruly at his side, it carried a sense of unpredictability and life he had never known. Unruly moved through the land with confidence, her steps sure, her eyes alert. She had learned much about the ranch since her arrival, but she also had her own ways of doing things. Sometimes the rancher would watch her from a distance, observing the way she handled the animals or repaired fences, and he felt a growing admiration for her skills. She was patient yet decisive, calm yet strong, and he realized that she had a wisdom about the land that rivaled his own. One morning, a sudden problem arose. A small herd of calves had wandered too close to the river, which had swollen after recent rains. The current was strong, and the calves were frightened, hesitant to move back to safety. The rancher raced toward them, ready to take control, but he found Unruly already there, her voice gentle but firm as she guided the animals away from the dangerous water. She moved among them with a careful rhythm, speaking softly, touching them just enough to keep them calm, her presence radiating both authority and compassion. The rancher stopped for a moment, watching her work. He had faced storms, predators, and wild animals, but here was a woman commanding respect from frightened calves without force or anger. He could not help but be impressed. "You have a gift with them," he said quietly, almost to himself. Unruly glanced at him, a small smile touching her lips. "They respond to care, not fear," she said simply. "It works for people, too." Her words struck him. She was not merely teaching him about animals. She was reminding him of life's deeper lessons. Respect, patience, and understanding could accomplish more than strength or authority alone. It was a simple truth, but one he had long forgotten in the solitude of his own routine. As the days passed, the rancher found himself thinking more and more about Unruly, not in terms of frustration or challenge, but with curiosity and a growing sense of connection. She challenged him in ways he had never experienced. When he approached a problem, she often saw solutions he had missed. When he became rigid in his ways, she found gentle means to guide him toward flexibility. And though she could be stubborn and proud, he began to see that this was not defiance but strength, a refusal to settle for anything less than truth and respect. One afternoon, while repairing a fence together, A moment of unexpected closeness occurred. The rancher handed Unruly a heavy wooden post, and their hands touched briefly as they lifted it into place. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to narrow, leaving only the two of them, the soft wind and the warm sun on their faces. Neither spoke, but the silence was meaningful, carrying a weight neither had expected. It was the first hint that their relationship might grow into something more than mutual respect. Yet understanding was not immediate. Unruly remained cautious, keeping her distance emotionally while fully engaging with the work of the ranch. She tested him often, asking questions that challenged his assumptions or pointing out flaws in his methods. At times he would feel irritation, but more often he found himself reflecting on her perspective. Slowly, he began to recognize the depth of her intelligence, her clarity of thought, and her ability to see beyond the surface of every situation. The rancher also began to share parts of his own life with her, stories of his childhood, memories of his parents, and the lonely years spent tending the land. He did not reveal everything at once, but small moments of honesty and vulnerability crept into their conversations. Unruly listened with quiet attention, never judgmental, always thoughtful. She began to open up as well, speaking of her life before the market, of the lessons she had learned from her people, and of the strength required to survive in a world that often misunderstood her. It was during one of these quiet evenings that a storm arrived, a violent one, unlike anything the rancher had faced in recent memory. Rain poured from the sky in sheets, wind howled through the trees, and lightning split the clouds overhead. The animals grew restless, frightened by the sudden chaos, and the rancher realized that they were in danger. But before he could act, Unruly moved quickly and decisively. She led the frightened animals into shelter, secured the barn doors, and helped him fortify the fences at risk of breaking. The storm raged for hours, yet together they worked tirelessly, their movements synchronized without need for instruction. In that moment, the rancher saw her true strength, not just physical, but emotional and mental. She remained calm under pressure, thoughtful in action, and fearless in the face of danger. He felt a deep respect for her, a recognition that she was his equal, capable of matching him in courage and skill. After the storm passed, the rancher and Unruly sat by the fire, exhausted but alive. The night was calm, the stars scattered across the sky like diamonds. The rancher spoke softly, his voice carrying both awe and gratitude. "I did not know what to expect when you came here," he said. "But I see now that I underestimated you." Unruly's eyes softened, and she nodded. "And I did not know what to expect either," she replied. "But I see that you are not so rigid as I feared." Their words were simple, but they carried a weight of understanding. The conflicts and challenges they had faced together had begun to transform into something deeper, a quiet trust, a shared respect, and an acknowledgement of each other's value. In the following weeks, the rancher noticed changes in himself. He found joy in Unruly's presence, a warmth he had long thought impossible in his solitary life. He began to appreciate the way she laughed, how she noticed the small details in the land, and how she spoke with honesty and clarity. He found himself seeking her opinion on decisions, listening to her perspective, and considering her ideas with care. Unruly, too, began to change. She saw that the rancher was not merely a man of routine and rules, but someone capable of kindness, patience, and quiet courage. She began to trust him more, allowing herself to rely on him in moments of difficulty. She also allowed small gestures of closeness, a touch, a shared smile, a word of encouragement, to enter her guarded life. Slowly, walls that had once separated them began to crumble, replaced by a growing sense of connection and mutual admiration. One morning, the rancher found Unruly tending to a small patch of flowers near the house. He approached quietly, observing the care and attention she gave to each plant. She noticed him and smiled, her eyes reflecting both pride and a gentle warmth. "Life can grow anywhere if you nurture it," she said. He nodded, realizing that she was not only speaking of flowers. Her words applied to the land, to the animals, and perhaps to the human heart as well. He thought of the months they had spent together, the storms they had faced, the conflicts they had navigated, and the respect and trust that had grown between them. Slowly he began to understand that love, in its quiet and enduring form, was beginning to take root. The land itself seemed to reflect this transformation. Where once the ranch had been purely a place of work and survival, it now held moments of beauty, laughter, and shared achievement. The rancher and Unruly worked together seamlessly, each learning from the other, each challenging and supporting the other in turn. And though they had not yet admitted it aloud, both felt the stirrings of something deeper, an emotional bond that promised to grow stronger with time. Even in moments of tension, when disagreements arose over work or methods, the rancher and Unruly had begun to listen, to compromise, and to value the other's perspective. What had once been frustration became dialogue, and dialogue became understanding. They had learned that true strength did not lie in dominance or control, but in empathy, cooperation, and the willingness to see beyond oneself. As spring gave way to summer, the ranch flourished under their joint care. The animals were healthier, the fields more productive, and the home filled with laughter and conversation. And in the quiet moments, watching a sunset, listening to the wind through the trees, or sharing a meal after a long day, the rancher realized that Unruly had changed not just the way the ranch functioned, but the way he saw the world, himself, and the possibilities of life. And, in truth, neither could have predicted this transformation. He had purchased her as a necessity, a helper on the ranch, and she had arrived with a fiery spirit and guarded heart. Yet through shared challenges, mutual respect, and the lessons learned from each other, something extraordinary had begun to grow. They were no longer simply rancher and worker, teacher and student, or man and woman. They were companions in every sense, partners in work, in understanding, and in the unspoken promise of a life shared. And so, by the end of this season, the first real change had taken place. The storms of conflict had passed, replaced by storms of understanding. The boundaries that had separated them had begun to fade, and in their place a new bond was forming, one built on respect, admiration, and the beginnings of love. The rancher and Unruly had learned that transformation often comes from the most unexpected encounters, and that life's richest rewards often emerge not from certainty and control, but from courage, trust, and the willingness to open one's heart to the unknown. Summer settled fully over the ranch, and with it came a warmth that seemed to touch not just the land but the hearts of those who lived on it. The long days were filled with work, but there was a new energy in the air, a sense of life and possibility that neither the rancher nor Unruly had expected. The land had grown greener, the animals healthier, and the routines of the ranch more efficient. But beyond all this, something far more profound was taking root between the two of them. Unruly moved through the ranch with a confidence that had only grown stronger. She had learned the rhythms of the animals, the needs of the land, and the ways in which the rancher approached his work. And yet, she did not become predictable. She maintained her independence, her unique perspective, and her quiet stubbornness. Every day she found small ways to challenge him, to ask questions that made him think, and to push the boundaries of his understanding. And he, in turn, had begun to embrace her challenges, realizing that they were not acts of defiance, but invitations to see the world in a new way. The rancher had changed as well. He found himself looking forward to her presence, seeking her advice, and listening with genuine interest when she spoke. Where he had once valued control and routine above all, he now began to appreciate creativity, intuition, and the subtle wisdom that Unruly brought into every action. He had discovered that life could be richer and more rewarding when shared, and that the presence of someone who challenged and inspired him was a gift far greater than he had ever imagined. One afternoon, a small incident brought them closer than ever before. A young foal had become trapped in a narrow ravine, frightened and unable to climb back to safety. The rancher rushed toward it, his heart pounding with concern. But before he could act, Unruly had already approached, her calm presence soothing the frightened animal. She carefully guided it out of the ravine, speaking softly, her hands steady and sure. The rancher watched in awe, realizing once again that her strength was not only physical but emotional and intuitive as well. "You never cease to amaze me," he said quietly, almost to himself. Unruly glanced at him, a faint smile playing on her lips. "I've always known how to handle these things," she replied. "But it helps to have someone who trusts you." Her words carried a deeper meaning than he initially realized. Trust had been something difficult for both of them, earned slowly through shared challenges and understanding. But now, in that moment, it seemed to solidify. A bond that went beyond work or necessity, hinting at something far more personal and meaningful. As the summer days stretched on, moments like these multiplied. They began to share small routines, simple joys that had previously been absent from the ranch. They laughed together while mending fences, competed playfully while gathering hay, and shared quiet evenings under the stars, listening to the distant sounds of the animals and the wind through the trees. Each small interaction deepened their connection, though neither spoke openly of the feelings growing between them. One evening, after a particularly long day of work, the rancher and Unruly sat on the porch watching the sun sink behind the distant hills. The sky was painted with deep oranges and purples, and the air was warm and still. Unruly leaned back, her eyes following the last rays of light as they touched the fields and fences. The rancher, sitting beside her, felt a sense of peace he had never known. "You make this place feel different," he said softly, not looking directly at her. She turned her gaze toward him, meeting his eyes with calm understanding.
"Different how?" she asked. "Alive."
"I never thought a ranch could feel this alive. Not just the land, but everything." Her lips curved into a gentle smile. "Then perhaps life is not just about control or work. Perhaps it's also about sharing it with someone who sees it differently." The words hung between them, carrying an unspoken recognition of the bond that had grown over the months. It was a bond built on respect, shared challenges, and a slowly emerging understanding of one another. And in that quiet moment, both realized that their feelings had deepened beyond admiration or friendship. Something far more tender, more intimate, was beginning to take root. As summer continued, the rancher began to notice subtle ways in which he depended on her presence. Her laughter became a sound that brightened even the longest, most exhausting days. Her advice and insight guided him through difficult decisions on the ranch, and her quiet strength gave him courage in moments of doubt or fear. He had learned to respect her independence, but he had also begun to crave her company in ways he had never anticipated. Unruly, too, felt the change within herself. She had always been cautious, wary of attachments and the vulnerability they demanded. But the rancher's consistent respect, patience, and genuine care had begun to break down her defenses. She found herself seeking his opinion, valuing his presence, and allowing small gestures of trust and closeness to occur naturally. Slowly, walls that had once protected her heart began to fall, replaced by a quiet openness to love. Their connection became most evident in the quiet, everyday moments, sharing a meal after long hours of work, tending to animals side by side, or simply sitting in silence watching the sunset. All these moments carried an intimacy that neither had expected. It was a love that did not need to be loud or dramatic, but was felt deeply in the small, meaningful ways they interacted each day. One afternoon, as they worked to repair a section of fence damaged by a sudden windstorm, the rancher watched Unruly handle a heavy post with ease and skill. Her hands were strong, her movements precise, and her focus unwavering. For a moment, he simply admired her, feeling a warmth in his chest that went beyond pride or respect. He realized that he cared for her deeply, not just for her abilities, but for her courage, her spirit, and the way she had become an integral part of his life. "You make everything look easy," he said, smiling. She glanced at him, her expression softening. "Perhaps it's easier when you're not alone," she replied. And for the first time, her words felt like an invitation, a quiet acknowledgement that their lives were intertwined in ways they had only just begun to understand. The days grew longer, and their relationship blossomed in subtle, unspoken ways. The rancher began to share stories of his youth, memories he had never spoken aloud, while Unruly revealed tales of her past, her people, and the lessons that had shaped her life. They discovered that despite their differences, they shared many values: resilience, courage, and a deep respect for the land and its creatures. A turning point came one evening during a long walk along the edge of the property. The sun had set, leaving a sky filled with stars, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of wildflowers. They walked side by side, speaking quietly of their dreams, their fears, and the challenges they had overcome. It was a moment of honesty and vulnerability, the first time they had shared their thoughts so openly, without fear or caution. "I never imagined life could feel like this," the rancher said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Like what?" Unruly asked, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "Full," he replied. "Not just the land or the work, but everything. Because of you." Her heart swelled at his words, and she reached out, placing a hand lightly on his arm. It was a gesture of trust, of connection, and of the quiet love that had been growing between them for months. The rancher looked down at her hand, then back at her face, and in that moment he knew that his life had been transformed. She had brought warmth, companionship, and a depth of feeling he had never known. From that day forward, their bond grew stronger and more visible. They worked together seamlessly, supported each other in challenges, and celebrated small victories side by side. The ranch, once a place of routine and solitude, had become a shared home filled with laughter, care, and the quiet joy of partnership. Their love was no longer a distant possibility. It had taken root, steady and enduring, like the land they both cherished. Yet even as their connection deepened, respect for each other's independence remained. Unruly maintained her freedom, her opinions, and her strength, and the rancher admired her all the more for it. Their love was not about possession or control, but about shared growth, mutual respect, and the understanding that two strong individuals could choose to walk life's path together. As summer drew to a close, the ranch flourished like never before. Crops grew abundantly, the animals thrived, and the home carried a warmth that reflected the hearts of those who lived there. And in the quiet moments, watching the sunset, tending the fields, or simply sitting together in silence, the rancher and Unruly understood that they had discovered something rare and precious. They had found not only love, but a partnership built on courage, trust, and mutual admiration. What had begun as a purchase, a necessity, had become a choice to share life, to face challenges together, and to nurture a bond that would endure. The land, the animals, and the ranch itself had become witnesses to their journey, reflecting the strength, resilience, and beauty of the love that had grown quietly, steadily, and powerfully between them. As the seasons turned once more, the ranch settled into a rhythm unlike any it had known before. Spring had given way to summer, summer to autumn, and the land itself reflected the steady passage of time. The hills, once dry and golden, were now lush with tall grass, and the trees bore the first hints of fall, their leaves beginning to turn deep shades of red and gold. Life on the ranch had changed not just in appearance, but in spirit. The animals were healthy and thriving, the fields productive, and the home alive with warmth, laughter, and purpose. And at the heart of it all were the rancher and Unruly, whose journey together had transformed both of their lives in ways neither could have imagined. The rancher often reflected on the moment he had first seen Unruly at the market, the fiery Apache woman known to traders as Unruly because of her independent spirit. He remembered the mixture of curiosity, caution, and perhaps a touch of foolishness that had led him to purchase her. At the time, he had no idea what he was bringing into his life. She had been a stranger, a mystery, and a challenge. He had thought of her as someone to help manage the land, perhaps even as a companion in the simplest sense. But what he had gained was far more profound. A partner, a teacher, a friend, and the love he had longed for without even realizing it. Unruly, too, had reflected on her own journey. She had arrived at the ranch wary, guarded, and fiercely independent. She had faced skepticism, tension, and doubt from both the rancher and those around her. Yet, she had discovered a place where her strength and intelligence were valued, where her independence was not a threat but a gift, and where she could share her heart without fear. She had learned that trust and love were not weaknesses but sources of courage, and that companionship could bring joy and fulfillment in ways she had never known possible. Together, they had weathered countless challenges. They had faced storms, tending to frightened animals and repairing fences in the pouring rain. They had dealt with accidents, illnesses, and the endless demands of ranch life. Each challenge had tested their patience, resilience, and problem-solving skills. Yet each obstacle had also strengthened the bond between them, creating a foundation of trust and mutual respect that was unshakable. The rancher often marveled at how much he had learned from Unruly. She had taught him to see the land differently, to approach problems with creativity rather than rigidity, and to value patience and empathy above mere strength. Her presence had brought life and energy to the ranch, but more importantly, she had awakened emotions and insights within him that he had long suppressed. He had come to realize that love was not only about closeness and warmth, but also about respect, understanding, and the ability to grow together. Unruly, in turn, had learned from the rancher. She had witnessed his steady determination, his unwavering care for the animals and the land, and his quiet strength in the face of adversity. She had seen how he approached life with discipline and honesty, and she had learned to trust his judgment and rely on his guidance in moments of uncertainty. Their relationship had become a delicate balance of independence and partnership, where each could flourish while supporting the other. The love between them had deepened over time, growing quietly and steadily, like the roots of a tree taking hold beneath the soil. It was a love built not on grand declarations or dramatic gestures, but on shared experience, understanding, and the simple joys of life together. They found happiness in the everyday moments. A shared meal after a long day of work, the quiet satisfaction of a well-tended field, laughter over a minor mishap, or the comfort of a hand held during a storm. Each day added layers of connection, trust, and affection, weaving their lives together in a tapestry of companionship and love. Neighbors and friends began to notice the change as well. The rancher, once solitary and distant, now welcomed visitors with warmth and shared stories of his land and animals. Unruly, who had once been met with caution and skepticism, now inspired admiration for her skill, courage, and intelligence. Together they were respected not only as individuals, but as a team, a partnership that exemplified what could be achieved when two people worked together with trust and mutual respect. There were still moments of challenge, of course. Life on the ranch was never easy, and both the rancher and Unruly faced days when fatigue, frustration, or unforeseen problems tested their patience. But by now they approached such moments with a sense of teamwork and understanding that had been absent in the early days. Arguments were brief and constructive, differences of opinion were respected, and even small mistakes were met with humor rather than harshness. They had learned that love was not a shield from difficulty, but a source of strength to face it together. As autumn deepened, they began to plan for the future. Together, they made decisions about the ranch that reflected both their skills and their shared vision. They organized the fields, repaired buildings, and expanded the livestock. Unruly contributed her knowledge of plants, animals, and natural patterns, while the rancher provided his experience, judgment, and careful planning. The land prospered under their joint care, a reflection of their unity, dedication, and love. Evenings on the ranch became moments of quiet reflection and connection. They would sit together on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky with brilliant shades of red, gold, and purple. The air carried the scent of the earth, animals, and fading blooms, and the sounds of the land, the soft lowing of cattle, the rustle of trees, and the distant call of birds, filled the space around them. In these moments they spoke softly of dreams, hopes, and the memories that had shaped their lives. One evening the rancher turned to Unruly, his voice gentle but earnest. "I never imagined life could be like this," he said. "I never thought I could feel this way, or that I would find someone who could complete it." Unruly reached out and took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. "You've never been alone, not really," she said. "You just didn't know it yet, and now we share it." The simplicity and honesty of their words reflected the depth of their bond. It was a love without pretense, built not on idealized notions but on shared experience, trust, and understanding. Each had been changed by the other, and each had found a home not just in the land, but in the heart of the other. The years passed and the ranch continued to thrive. Their bond grew stronger with each season, resilient and enduring. The rancher and Unruly became known throughout the region as a couple of extraordinary skill, respect, and harmony, admired not only for their management of the land but for the partnership and love they exemplified. They faced life's challenges with courage, grace, and unity, and they celebrated life's joys with gratitude and laughter. Their love, once tentative and cautious, had become a steady flame, illuminating every corner of their lives. They had discovered that true companionship was not about possession, control, or conformity, but about supporting one another, embracing each other's strengths and weaknesses, and growing together. The ranch had become a symbol of their unity, a place where work, care, and love coexisted in perfect balance. In quiet moments, the rancher would often reflect on the strange twist of fate that had brought Unruly into his life. He had purchased her on a whim, uncertain of what he was doing, and yet that single decision had transformed everything. He realized that life often worked in unexpected ways and that the most profound rewards could emerge from choices that seemed simple or impulsive at the time. Unruly, too, would reflect on the journey she had taken. She had arrived at the ranch as a stranger, cautious and independent, and she had grown into a partner, a friend, and a loved one. She had found a place where her skills, courage, and wisdom were valued, and a heart that welcomed her, without trying to diminish her. The lessons she had learned on the ranch went beyond work and survival. They were lessons of trust, love, and the beauty of human connection. The rancher and Unruly often sat together under the stars, holding hands, listening to the sounds of the land and reflecting on all they had built together. They spoke little in these moments, for words were unnecessary. Their lives had become intertwined so completely that presence alone was enough. A quiet assurance that they were no longer alone, and that together they could face anything. And so, the story that began with a purchase, a market transaction, and uncertainty had grown into a tale of love, partnership, and transformation. The rancher and Unruly had discovered that life's greatest treasures are often found in the most unexpected places, and that true love is not about taming or controlling, but about respect, trust, and the courage to open one's heart. Years later, when the rancher looked over the land, seeing the thriving fields, the healthy animals, and the home filled with warmth and life, he understood the true meaning of companionship.
Unruly had become not only the love he had needed, but the person who had awakened the best parts of himself.
She had challenged him, taught him, and inspired him, and in doing so had given his life meaning, joy, and fulfillment beyond measure. And Unruly, standing beside him as the sun set behind the hills, knew that she had found a home, not only on the land, but in his heart. Their journey had been long, filled with challenges, learning, and growth, but it had led them to a love that was enduring, respectful, and true. They had discovered that life, with all its hardships and uncertainties, could be beautiful when shared, and that love, like the land, could flourish when nurtured with care, patience, and understanding. The ranch, the land, and the animals stood as witnesses to their journey, a testament to the power of trust, respect, and shared effort. And in the quiet of the evening, as the stars shimmered above and the wind whispered through the trees, the rancher and Unruly stood together, hands intertwined, hearts united, and lives forever changed by the love they had found in each other.